Hey friends, welcome to Experience Data Talk, a weekly show featuring data science leaders and technologists from around the world. My name is Mike Delgado, and this is episode 111. And today I'm super excited because Piyanka Jain is back on the show, and we talk with her about ways to build a data literate culture and also what are the mistakes to avoid. She's been helping companies do this for a long time. She's learned a lot, and today she's going to talk with us about strategic ways to launch data literacy programs, ways to tie it to KPIs that actually matter to your business, and also how to deal with data skeptics within your organization and turn them into data enthusiasts. Talk about this and a lot more. Here's our conversation. Piyanka, welcome to Data Talk.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're always doing amazing things. And the last time we chatted, we were talking all about data literacy. And in fact, I was scrolling through LinkedIn yesterday, and I saw that you posted something that got a lot of reactions, a lot of comments.
Yeah.
And you're always stirring up trouble, Piyanka.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that post that you wrote about around data literacy in organizations.
Yeah, I mean, data literacy is the key and hot topic of the year, I would say, 2020, and probably of the decade that we have transitioned into. But yet there is a lot of misguided misinformation out there. A lot of folks have gotten into it, and they're saying we do it. We help with digital transformation, and as a natural extension, we do data literacy and so on. And as a result, as we are talking to our prospective clients, we're seeing a lot of them are being misguided, unfortunately, into like. One of the things I was chatting about yesterday, because I saw yet another such call, and I'm like, oh, this is a sure to fail, but you'll realize that in 2021 that you failed, and it's such a waste of 1 year. And they were talking about, they did a generic high-level assessment with one of the top research companies, which was very high level. They did an assessment. We do the data culture assessment as well around 4Ds, but it's fairly detailed around 30 dimensions. They've done a generic study, which is high level at the company level, talking about, that they need data literacy. So that's how the assessment came into data literacy. And then their solution to that was sending people en masse to some MOOC and available courses online, Linda and whatever else. And it just felt like such a patchwork. And I realized that one is this is not necessarily, when you are going to send cohort of people to training, do you have a clarity of what your success metric is? First of all, how are you going to measure data literacy before and after? And do you have an understanding of how this generic training, whatever you choose, or the university courses that professors are put together, whatever, how is that going to tee up and line up to your success metrics and to the top line of your business? Why are you doing this? The question is, why are you doing this? And so I was sort of, I kind of wrote down in my frustration, like, oh, there's yet another company going to be failing 2021. And, there's nothing much you can do because they are being guided by really big brand names. And I wouldn't be, I didn't have the heart to tell them. I mean, I shared what I could, but I was just like, there's nothing you're a train going at 300 miles an hour. I'm not going to stand in front of that. So
yeah. Yeah. Well, I feel like that is seemingly good advice, right? Like you do an assessment, and you're like, okay, we see these areas that your organization can improve on.
Yeah.
Data literacy can help in these areas. So let's do an online course and let's have everyone take it. And that should help resolve some of these issues. It seems like that would work.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, and it's also mandatory training. They were going to do mandatory training. It makes sense. I mean, it makes sense at the outside. But there's devils in the detail here. We do the same thing. We do an assessment, and we do a lot of other things also, though. And by the way, I mean, like, I should be. Let me be clear and honest. It's not like we haven't failed. We have failed.
Right.
Like 2011 onwards, we were doing the exact same thing. We were going into the organizations and doing training, and then the pre and post of the training was awesome. But like, we didn't move any KPIs of the organization. And so to me, that was a failure. like, okay, the training was good and folks were appreciative of, this is engaging content and blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, it didn't move the KPIs of the organization. It didn't make the organization more data driven the way we would measure it. And so it's a failure. And so many, many folks are now starting down the journey. We have 8 years ahead of folks because we have failed in first 3-4 years. We did this. And slowly we figured out that this is not necessarily the way to do it. And there we found out pieces and bits and pieces. We found out that it has to be use case driven, which is basically saying that if you do generic training, go online or even live, go away, do this one day, 3-day, whatever training, come back. You come back and it's business as usual because you haven't contextualized the training into their day-to-day workflow. So why would how do I take that training, whatever, those were great insights. How do I take that back to my workflow? That is one thing, learning transfer rate. That's one thing people need to think through. The other thing is it's not one size fit all. Not everybody needs the same level of skills, right? Data in a frontline. Let's take an example of let's say Verizon, and they have a customer service, and let's say their customer, the frontline, people who are calling, when you're calling for your phone and you're calling, that frontline customer service, do they need to be data scientists? They don't, right?
No, not at all.
But they need to be somewhat data driven. So when we do the sort of the early on stratified learning solution, we figure out who needs to be at what level of data literacy. Everybody needs data literacy, but at different levels. So for example, for a frontline managers, they probably just need to be data enthusiasts so that they can understand their own performance on a day-to-day basis. Like, hey, in last week, I was my average hold time is looking like this. My average, my shrink is looking like this. Whatever those metrics they can measure and they can put out for them, right? Their managers or supervisors now are managing their team. They would need a little bit more skill to be able to collate the data and figure out how is their teams doing. Do they have some significant issue because some product change happened or something got rolled out on the website and they are getting too many calls from this, so they need to escalate it. So their managers might need to be a little bit more like maybe data literate. And the directors, the people who are managing these call centers, they might need to be even more, and they maybe need to be data educated. And some of the folks who are on the headquarters who are managing these many call centers, they might need to be citizen analysts because they need to figure out on a day-to-day basis how to manage shrink, how to manage, the employee turnover, how to manage, so they're managing bigger issues and so on. So the point being that it's not one size fit all. Don't take everybody and say, oh, you go for this, whatever, 3-hour, 1-day, 3-day, whatever, generic training. So that's one part. The other part is it needs to be tied. So if we go back to the Verizon example and we talk about this, call center, if the call center person, the agent, if you're going to send them, first of all, if you're going to send them for 3 hours of training, that costs you money because you're taking them off the call. So you have to be very diligent in what calls, what training you would be giving them. And the same for managers and supervisors and so on. So the question is, how would you make it stick? And the way to make it stick is to tie their learning to a project, to the things that they are doing in day-to-day workflow. And so the question, and so our approach to that is completely use case driven. When we are doing data literacy and upskilling, it's never in vacuum, like, oh, just do this training online or whatever else. I mean, they do stuff online and offline, but it's tied to an outcome, tied to a project, tied to something which they do in a day-to-day workflow. And we are saying now, do the same thing that you're doing, but you're just going to use these skills now to better manage yourself, right? Because we all know we can only manage what we can measure, right? And if these call center folks, if the frontline managers know, oh, look, this last week, this and this happened, look at my numbers, they're changing, and then it's lower from the week before, whatever else, they can do something about it. Otherwise, the supervisors in general is talking like, oh, you guys are not performing well. How do you know you're not performing well, right? So it needs to be tied to a use case. So the two things by my long ramble, summarizing my long ramble, one is it needs to be persona-led. Everybody needs to be a different level of data literacy. Secondly, It needs to be use case driven, which means it needs to be tied to something real in their day-to-day workflow. Another question is, how do you choose use case? And that's a very important question. And that kind of brings me to pragmatic data science and sort of the things we were talking about earlier this week. The projects you would want to choose are the projects that have give you the highest ROI at whatever level you are. So for example, if you're in a call center, most of the call centers are mostly interested in managing their calls down or managing their costs down, right? So they'll need to be teeing up to what are the things we can do to manage calls down, and also for first call resolution, FCR. So they have to higher FCR, higher NPS or CSAT, lower calls, lower the second call needed for the second call, and lower the the costs essentially. At different levels, they'll be managing different things. If you can tee up your projects, the projects that you choose, to the top line, which is what we call analytics agenda, then when you do the projects, then you do when you do effective data literacy, you'll actually move the top lines of the organization, right? Then there is value, right? You did something like this is sort of what we've figured out in the last 3 years that we've been now more effective. When we get done with a data literacy project from end to end, like 9 months or so, we have moved the data culture quotient, which we have measured before and after. We have moved the data literacy of the organization, which is every individual takes the takes data literacy test along 24 skills and competency to measure their individual level that they need to be. They don't need to be all data scientists or citizen analysts, whatever the level they need to be, they'll get the appropriate sort of questions and then before and after. So we moved that. And thirdly, and most importantly, we have moved the KPIs of the organization, right? That's when you call it a success. Not that, oh, I sent 30,000 people to some generic training. How is that a success?
Yeah, because having people go through training, you can put a KPI on that, X number of people that you want to get in your organization, right? That's an easy KPI just to go, okay, how many people completed it? Great, check mark, we're off. But I like what you're saying about, first of all, making sure that these trainings are tailored to the person and what they're doing, because you're right, not everyone needs to have extensive knowledge in data science. It depends on their level, the work that they're doing. And I like also that you're tying it to the ROIs that are actually going to be impacting the business that they're in. I think that's really, really smart. Can you maybe give some other examples of how this works, maybe in not so much the leadership roles, more these management roles that are not necessarily tied to, like, for example, maybe even in my role in social media, like I'm thinking like, well, I don't need to, let's just say, for example, I don't need to know data science. That's not going to help me in my role. Yeah. How do you speak to those people who are managers who are like, I don't sit in front of a computer doing data. That's not really important to me.
Yeah. And so one of the personas we discovered early in our work is called data skeptic. So your new role that you're just taking on, the persona you're taking is data skeptic. I don't believe I need data. I don't believe we need data. And they're the people who are, if you go into a meeting, they're the people who are mostly boo-booing over all the data that people are projecting on the presentation and saying, how do you know that? They're poking holes in other people's sort of presentation and saying, at the end of the day, data skeptics are a real deal, and they really need to be addressed because they can derail any well thought through data literacy project and data culture work like you wouldn't believe. Just like you need executive sponsorship, you also need a mechanism to address data skeptic. Now, you can't turn data skeptic overnight into data educated citizen analyst data scientist. There is a pathway. And so what's the key difference between data skeptic and data enthusiast? Because at the end of the day, what you need to do is turn the neutralized data skeptics either into a neutral place or make them data enthusiastic. The key difference is them believing in the power of data, first of all, right? It's forget about whether I need it. Do you believe that data drives value, right? That data, when you look at data, for example, many people nowadays use Fitbit or even their iPhones and so on have measurement, right? And so, for example, I hike. I'm a weekend warrior, so I hike on Saturdays with my friends. And one of my friends, he's a fairly senior guy. He manages products for startups, and so he is a big measurer. So and I hike a lot, so I know most of these trails, and I never have my measurements on and so on. But he has, and so he comes back out of the hike, says we did 7.2 mile, or we did 10.6 today, and this was the elevation gain, and this was our average speed, and so on.
Yeah.
And it's important for him, and it's important for many people. If you are going to, for example, if you were training, and and he's done that, he's trained for Whitney, and then at some point he might do Everest. If you have a goal to do something of that kind, you better be measuring those metrics to understand how you're doing. Is over time, are you improving you? And some of these tools, they give you your VO2, like, what's your max heart rate you went to, what was your recovery rate, what was your oxygen consumption, all of that, because all of those things are going to be important in how you train to be able to do base camp, right? Or to be able to do Whitney or whatever else. So I think, and it's day to day. So it's important for us to address, as we do go through this project, it's important for us to address data skeptics and turn them into neutral or data enthusiasts. And the way we'd go about doing that is a sort of like a multi-prong approach. We usually have some things coming from leadership, because a lot of folks are inspired by leadership, what they're doing, what they're thinking.
Yeah.
Instead of having like a vignette of the CEO saying something about, then talking about day to day, we might have some videos or content and articles about, look how LAPD is now able to preempt crimes and has reduced crime rate from this percent to this percent because of this. And that makes a very interesting story. And so slowly we reel them in into becoming either neutral or data enthusiastic. Once they are data enthusiasts, it's an easy path, because from there, it's skill set, it's competency, we can match it, we can figure out where you need to end up at, so on, match the right project, match the right mentors, all of that is doable. But it's very important to address those data skeptics. So to going back to your question, you are doing, you said marketing, and you're doing social media. Why is it important for you? Well, everything is digital. You're not meeting your customers day to day. Millions of people are doing something. They're tweeting something. What's the general sentiment? What is going on? Do you know from week to week what is changing? And how is what you are doing tying to what's happening in the market? Once you start understanding the relationship between the action and the reaction, and the reaction that you really want, there's no other better way for you to do it than data, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's a really, really good example. So, and I love like how passionate you are. Like when I read your LinkedIn post and everyone started chiming in to respond, I love your passion, because you're like really concerned about these organizations that are just being so generic, because you were talking about how like 8 years ago, that's what you were doing because it felt right. Like it totally feels right that that's the right way to go. But you've been doing it for such a long period of time. You're like, don't make this mistake. You got to tie it to ROIs. You got to have KPIs involved.
Yeah. I mean, it has taken us some while to turn, and I'm a big enabler and evangelizer. I would like, if people can learn from our mistakes and can start thinking about these things. I think one of the things I am recognizing is that people, I don't know what complex that is, but people like complex.
Yeah.
They like complex. If something is simple, they're thinking, this is too simple. And I don't know, we have this natural gravity towards, like, if it's complex and I can't understand, if it's AI and, multi-layered perceptrons that are feeding into it and it's completely black box, okay, we must be doing something right. Like, why? You have no clue. You don't understand this, but somehow, because you don't understand it, you like it.
Yeah.
And that's the same thought process we are seeing. People are, in a way, and that's where I go back to my pragmatic data science, which is what I've been passionate about and have been talking about. People sort of gravitate towards the new in the room, new in the cloud, augmented reality, AI, whatever else that's the latest buzzword. However, not recognizing that the biggest, the easiest, and the most ROI still lies in the easiest solution. And so when I go into, and like, for example, and this is going back to data literacy, and we're often talking to our clients and they have like this 2020 plan, and these are the 10 projects they're going to do this first half or second half, this whole year. And I sort of look at that list and I ask them, okay, so what's the, okay, great, this project, like what's the value, expected value? Why are you doing this project? What's the expected value? Oh, we haven't been that diligent. We haven't gotten to that yet, right? So how, if you don't have an expected ROI, why are you even like doing that? So for example, going back to Verizon, right? Let's say, and I'm making these numbers up, I don't know the exact numbers, but let's say Verizon, you go to Verizon and you can do checkout, right? You can add your data pack, you can do your addition of phones, you can do the plan, you add it in your cart and you check out and, you buy whatever you're wanting to buy. Either the subscription or you're adding some packages or whatever else. So let's say and that process of starting to add the package, starting to add something in the cart and then completing in it, where you put in your payment and you submit, that's called conversion, right? And let's say Verizon online conversion, I don't know the exact numbers, I'm making this up. Let's say this number is 54%. So conversion, 54% of the people who start actually do a submit, and they've paid and that transaction has gone through. So the question is, okay, 54%, is that good or bad? Maybe, that needs to be answered, first of all, looked at. And let's say that's one project in one of these line items. So it's say increasing conversion, increasing checkout conversion is one of the project. Okay, first of all, is that good or bad? And are you able to influence it? And if you're able to influence it, what is your expected movement that you can expect? So quick math here, and I'm just going to showcase how you're going to do the quick math. Obviously, you can do more involved math, but let's say Verizon gets 1 million customers, million people who start this transaction on a month, right? And let's say, and so 54% of them convert. Let's say let's say the hypothesis was, if we did this project, we were able to move 54% to 55%, right? 1% movement. 1% movement for 1 million. I better start writing down before I.
This is a special math episode of Data Talk.
Where I'm going to start failing very quickly. Anyway, so 1 million people, 1 million transactions, or 1 million of these sessions, and 1% of that. Okay, so it's 10,000. All right. So if we were to do it right, we would get 10,000 more conversions, right? More people who will buy. And let's say on an average, the CLV, and at some point customer lifetime value, or CLV, or historical value, whatever else, they have figured out that on an average, when the customer sort of onboards, they last about let's say 30 months, right? So once you acquire a customer, on an average, they are there for 30 months. And there are advanced methods to even figure out at the customer level, given your profile, what's your expected retention, number of days you're going to stay, and then and then the customer lifetime value. Let's say, and I'm doing all this at a very generic level because I'm doing the back of the envelope. So let's say 1% per person per month is $50, right? So $50 times 30 months, which is $1,500, right? Times your 10K. That would be the value, and I'm going to start adding my zeros here. So looks like 15 million to me, right? So 1% conversion. So this project, if this was my line item, would be, okay, it's worth 15 million, because we believe if we look down and if we reduce the product friction, or whatever the friction that is happening, or whatever we addressed, it'll be $15 million. Great. Now you've done that for one project. And of course, there were a lot of assumptions that I made. If you're within the organization, you would have some of these values in a better way. And of course, you've probably done the segmentation work. You're Verizon, you've done the segmentation work. So, one project is worth 15 million. Second project, okay, it's another project that is about UX, and we have to do some A/B testing, whatever else. You can look at the whole lineup of these projects, 15 of them. And then if you have the value attached, you can order it in decreasing order and know which are the 5-6 projects you need to prioritize. Yes? Not rocket science. We just sort of did it on the fly. And especially if we were within the organization, we would do this even better, even if we do it back of the envelope. This is pragmatic data science. How are you coming in with a long list of projects and saying, we are doing all these projects, but not necessarily knowing my expected ROI or how this is going to move what I'm trying to move. And too much of this is happening. And then you're talking about AI and AR. Like, help me. like seriously. And this is happening so much in the world that we are living in. And I'm completely like flabbergasted that let's do the basics first. Let me figure out. And then, so now let's say I've identified like this is the highest value project that we can do. $15 million is going to be moved. If you're able to move it, what's the solution? Well, we need to figure out some ways of using statistics, advanced statistics, whatever else, to figure out what's the conversion, where the conversion drop is happening. And so, this is, 1 million customers are going through. There's a lot of data in here. We can surely do somewhat like a classification, because it's either converted or not. This is a classic classification problem. You can do a logistic regression, you can do decision tree. Then if that doesn't give you umpteen results, you can get into machine learning, maybe a gradient boosting or some kind of ensemble, random forest. And if that doesn't give you results, maybe you can go into neural nets, deeper solution, right? But you now know what this project is worth. So you know how much time you can invest, how many resources you can invest. And then hopefully you're going to use a systematic hypothesis-driven approach so that you're not doing this for 6 months, 9 months. This kind of project should be doable in 2 months or 3 months max, right? If you are hypothesis-driven, if you are framing your question. So this is what I mean by pragmatic data science. And this is what I'm very passionate about. This is what I want people to start thinking about. Simple. Let's start simply identifying the top projects, simply identifying the resources needed for it, simply identifying the hypotheses you have towards it. And, then slowly, as need be, maybe even correlation will tell you, hey, of these 46% people who are dropping off, 2% are actually dropping off because their payment was rejected. Great. Like, okay, payment rejected. What are the reasons for payment rejection? Here's the Pareto, 80% because of this, 20%, and of the 80%, 40% is addressable. Great.
That's actually it's just a smart way of managing projects. I mean, I think about whether or not you're working on a data project, you have a bunch of things you need to work for on your team, for the company. And as you're deciding, like, what are the things that are most important? What are the things where I could provide the most value to my team, to my company, to bring in the revenue or whatever it is my KPI is? Like, that is like the smartest way to go about organizing what things I need to accomplish first and things to work on.
And that's why one of the reasons when we are going and talking about tying it back to data literacy, and we're saying different people need different levels of data literacy, they all need this sort of way of thinking. And we call it Bader. It's the frame. I think before in your one of our talks, I've talked about the Bader framework. So some of your listeners might be familiar with that. Bader is our framework. It's an acronym which stands for these 5 steps. So it's a 33-point framework which stands for business question analysis plan, data collection, insights, and recommendation. And it's a systematic approach of marrying the data science with decision science. And what it enables is for you to approach a problem in a systematic manner while making sure that the stakeholders, the business constraint, the historical know-how, all of that gets sort of mixed into or gets input into your algorithmic approach of how you're going to solve the question. Because if you need something, okay, this conversion problem, we have a significant problem and something broke and we need to solve it now because we're bleeding, 10 million a day. You need to solve that quickly. You can't build neural network on that or AI on that. You need to solve that quickly. So you need to use some maybe correlation analysis, quickly figuring out where the bug might be, where the things have broken, what we can stop, and so on. And then, we have 2 months or 3 months to optimize our 1% conversion because we haven't been able to move it in years. Okay, that, you can spend 2 months in there and then you can go into more detail and so on, right? So looking at this in a systematic manner so that you get value from your data now. I'm all about getting value from your data now. And so even if we have a customer which is a $10 million average revenue, they are e-commerce. online. They sell electronic parts, essentially. It's the same approach. Whether you're 10 million or 10 billion company, the approach remains the same of how do you solve. So they have some significant issue in refund and sort of lots of refunds and chargebacks and so on and so forth. And trying to figure out which products are causing that, which customer sets, is a particular geo. This is simple correlation analysis. And any of our trainees, the folks we are training to be data scientists, or future data scientists through our academy, they are able to solve it, right? Same approach, same Bada framework. And that would be the same as we would recommend for going for this Verizon problem that we were talking about, the 1% conversion. It's the same, whether it's a 10 million or $10 million revenue or $10 billion revenue. It's the same approach to solving problems.
And for those listening, our last conversation with Piyanka, and I'll make a URL for this because the framework is awesome. You describe it in detail in our last episode. So for those listening to the podcast, the short URL for that episode is ex.pn/ARYNG framework. And that will send you over to that particular blog post. It's a full lengthy interview with Piyanka, all about it. And I love the systems you created. And also, I want to talk about kind of the first part of all this, which is the question. Because you're always about asking really smart, good questions. Because if you're not going in on the good question, you're going to waste a lot of time.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you could maybe get some advice for those of us who are trying to frame up the right question.
Yeah.
Because to me, that's where it all starts.
Yeah, and that's so important. And thank you for asking that. And this is our we make a lot of we have a lot of frameworks for a lot of these things. This framework is called 3 key questions framework, and it says like 3 key questions. You would think it's 3 key questions. It's actually a series of 3 key questions, but essentially the 3 key questions you need to ask. So at any level. So for example, you, Mike, if you are looking at your marketing effectiveness and you're saying whether I'm doing social media, is it creating enough brand value? Is it creating enough know-how? So the first thing to figure out, the first question you need to ask is, how am I doing? How do I measure how am I doing? So that goes to figuring out the top KPIs for you, or the same for, if I go back to the $10 million customer, the average revenue, 10 million electronics e-commerce, they'll ask the same question, how am I doing? Or how do I measure how am I doing? It's the same for Verizon customer care. How am I doing? How do I measure how am I doing? Right.
It's such a foundational, great question to be asking.
Right.
It's such a key question, but and it sounds so simple, but like if you don't know your current data, how you're currently doing, like you can't move from there. You're not going to grow.
Yeah, exactly. If you don't know how am I doing, for example, if you ask me, or if I go back to my hiking example, my buddy whom I hike with, and I ask him, how are you doing? It has many answers. Right? I'm doing very well. My body mass index is this. Is that relevant to his training for Everest or Whitney? No.
Right.
But most likely, maybe not. I don't know. I have to think through it. But basically, as a metric, what he's interested at that point is what's his average time per mile, maybe what's his average pace is, what's his VO2 max is, what's his max heart rate is, and all of those things. But there, in all of this, still, there is one key metric or 1 or 2 max key metrics that we should be sort of interested in. So it should not be like a plethora of metrics. I'm also interested in this. I'm also measuring my success with this and blah, blah, blah. It needs to be 1 or 2 key metrics. So for example, for going back to Verizon customer care, I think their top line metric probably is going to be cost, right? And there's going to be, how do I drive my cost down, or sort of a cost? And then the question would be, in that same, how am I doing? The question would be, what drives cost? For our e-commerce, $10 million e-commerce electronics company, maybe it's profit, or maybe it's growth. It could be different, right? Depending on what, and maybe it is profit and growth. That's fine. So the question then would be, okay, what drives profit for you? Profit is revenue minus cost minus loss. Okay, great. Now you're doing the math there. And then there might be some dotted line. And for Verizon customer care, it will be revenue minus cost minus loss, maybe if it is looking at profit, but it also will be brand image, right? So there's a dotted line from that brand image to the top metric you're going for. And also there's some solid line, which is pure math. Then the question is, what drives revenue for you? Then the question, and so you see what I'm saying. So you start with how am I doing, defining 1 or 2 key metrics that you were going to measure your success with, depending on what you're trying to do, and then create the driver metrics and understanding of the driver metrics from there on. So that's the first question you ask: how am I doing? And the answer to that is measurement portfolio, measurement, creating your measurement framework. Okay, by the way, before I go, and this, I have carefully placed this book.
I see it. It's beautiful.
Yeah. This has a leadership section. I think section 2 or 3 is a leadership section, and that has these 3 key questions in there.
Okay, and for those listening to the podcast, the name of the book is called Behind Every Good Decision.
Yes, and it became an Amazon bestseller last year and still holding up.
That is awesome. Congratulations. Right? That is so cool.
Yes. So how am I doing? That's the first question. Second question is sort of related to what we were talking about. What sort of drives am I doing? Oh, we are looking at what drives am I doing, those drivers in different contexts. What's the 2x2 of your profit and growth? What's your 2x2 of your product by cost? What's your 2x2? So you're starting to look at your product portfolio or your customer portfolio. So how am I doing? What drives am I doing? That's the second question. And then the third question is, who are my customers and what are their needs? Because we can all go home unless we are serving our customers. In each of our roles, we are serving our customers. So that means I need to understand who are my customers. We need to find some ways of simple or more complex segmentation, their lifetime value, and so on. And then what are their needs? Do they have different needs? Even if you were to do your customer segmentation, for example, on value and frequency, you would get some kind of 2x2. And on that, you can figure out these are highest value, but very low growth, or very highest value, but whatever your second metric is. And you can start figuring out, this customer set is really, really high value, but not growing. Why is that? Or this customer set, or whatever else. So you start understanding your customer in a better way. There's a customer set which has a very high need. For example, for this 10 million e-commerce company, this customer set has a lot of refund because they have a very high need of customer touch point. They need, once they get their electronic cord or part, they need actually installation. Once you understand that, you can start offering that installation bundling to those customers and not to others, and actually charging them, right? So it's the same that you would do, and then same for customer care as well. Hey, you actually, when this and this and this happens, truck rolls happen, and truck rolls cost us, every truck roll cost us, $200, whatever else. And so all of that you can start finding out when you ask these questions. And when you ask these questions, you get some answer, but you don't ask them and you're done for the day. You ask them, you get some insights, and then it's like basically if you're hiking down the canyon essentially, and you see these 3 questions once, and then you revisit them, you'll get a more detailed answer. And you revisit them, you'll get more detailed answer. And this is how you're going to know. Once you start knowing these are the questions, then you'll know, actually what's important for me is refund. I need to focus on that, because if I'm able to move my refund percentage from, right now it's at 3%. If I'm able to move it from 3% to 2%, I will save $1 million there, right? That's how you identify your top projects, because you have just started going from your top metric to what drives those top metrics and understanding your customer, and you're putting your analytics, and we call this analytics agenda. You're making your analytics agenda, the questions you want to ask, in the context of what you're trying to do, what the KPIs you're driving towards.
Those are fantastic questions. I'm like taking notes here, writing them all down because I really, really like them. They're really, really good. And like you said, they require a lot of thought, because when you officially think about it, you might have a gut reaction to just answering it. But then you really spend your time thinking about those questions and how it relates to your business or the things you're doing. And like you said, revisiting that question and thinking about it, like you're going to get more precise with your answer, which is going to then, like you said, help you develop that really crucial KPI that is actually driving results for your business, for yourself. And I also like that you mentioned about really zeroing in on 1 or 2 key KPIs. Like those are the big drivers for what it is you're trying to achieve. Now, there's also all these other KPIs that can roll up into what's driving it.
Right.
But ultimately, at the end of the day, you have like these one or two. And
Yeah.
that's actually where a lot of us get into trouble,
Yeah.
especially, in what I'm doing with marketing, there's like tons of KPIs. Every
Yeah.
social network has a KPI, right? But you can't get caught up in every single thing. Otherwise,
Yeah.
you're going to get just overwhelmed with all the data. You need to focus in on what are the crucial things that are actually going to help me make this thing better.
And by nature of things, when you increase something, something else will decrease. But the question
That's
is,
right.
what are you interested in, right?
That's right. That's
I'm
right.
going to focus on going back to like, if I'm training for something and I'm going to focus on my body mass index, then my fat is going to go down or whatever else, right? My lean muscle is going to go up, my fat is going down, my calorific value might go down. Some metric is going down, some is going up. What's important for me?
That's right. That's right. Like the fitness example, like if you're interested in like improving muscle, like if I sit there and go to the gym, I can just be focused on building muscle with weights and kettlebells and doing different body weight exercises. But then I maybe not be doing cardio, and then my heart rate, my cardio is not doing so well. So you're right. It's like, what is it that you want to focus on, and realizing you're focusing everything on those two things. Yeah, there's going to be some other things that are important to you that maybe are not going to do so well during that period.
Yeah, and zooming out, Michael, which one should you do, cardio or focus on muscle? Depends on what you're trying to do. For example, if you were training for base camp, then you start from there. My key metric is to be able to finish this distance, and I know what drives it is this and this. I haven't done this, so I don't know what drives it. Is it the cardio? I would think that this will be your cardiac, or your cardio, the ability to be able to do large distances. And so that means that would be more important than others. And so sort of zooming out, when you are overwhelmed as a marketing manager or a product person, if you're overwhelmed with so many metrics, the question then is to go back on the table, go back on the board with your team or alone, and ask yourself, what is the most important thing for me? Why am I even employed in this business? What is one thing I should be able to deliver? Then I can call it quits. I can call it I did my job well. What is that one thing you should be able to do? And for a marketing person, it might be, ROI. I need to be able to drive for every 100K I spend every quarter, I should be able to get maximum revenue, right? And some of it, sometimes for marketing and sales folks, sometimes it's a directly attributable revenue because it's digital. Sometimes it's not, and you need to have figured out a dotted line to it. Either ways, the question is, first figure out, don't worry about, a lot of times I get the answer, I would love to measure it, but I can't measure it. Don't worry about whether you can measure it or not right now. Figure out what's that most important metric is. Once you have that, then you can start using your creative juices to figure out, okay, it's not directly available to me, but what is a proxy for it? What's the nearest proxy for it, right? And that's how we, my long back, 10 some years ago, when we initially started looking at customer care for PayPal, when I was part of PayPal, we started looking at, satisfaction is very important. What drives satisfaction? It's not what you thought. Agent politeness and agent helpfulness is actually first and most important thing is FCR, first call resolution. If the customer doesn't have to call you again, they're happy. That is what is driving value for them. That is what is driving. So it's as against what the common thought was: average hold time, average speed of answer, age, whatever else. More than that, what we found out, again, data can tell you different things. There were a lot of hypotheses, but the data told us, actually FCR is more important than anything else. And that was the starting of the coining of the word FCR and so on, right? So you can only know that when you do the analysis. You might have some hypotheses, but you have to know. But don't get dismayed or disappointed if you think that, I don't have, ideally I would like to measure this, but I don't have it. First, nail down your KPI. Then you can start thinking creatively. If you don't have your exact metric to measure that metric, there would be proxies, some ways of figuring out, what drives satisfaction. A very good example is CSAT. Customer satisfaction didn't exist. And then customer care found out a way of saying, okay, of the people who call in, we will survey them and ask them, are you satisfied? Or are you going to recommend us, NPS or CSAT, right? And right after the call, so we know it's really fresh in their mind. So a lot of these metrics are created, and that means if you wanted customer satisfaction, you needed to create a survey. Same for an online website. If you want to know, hey, are we, somebody's, for example, go to Aryng.com, somebody is browsing, and we want to know, hey, are people finding what they need on Aryng.com? Then we might have to instrument sort of like a pop-up, window. What were you looking for? Did you find what you were looking for? Ask them, right? A percentage of people will reply, maybe 10% of people will reply, and we'll start getting a sense of, hey, currently as the website stands, seems like we are at 59% of people finding what they need. Can we move that? If we move that, why should we work on that? If we work on that, then and for example, for consulting business, it's different than conversion. Conversion, you'll directly see the dollar value, right? For us, we won't see, because who's looking, what are they, if they find, what happens, and then eventually somewhere we do a consulting or a data literacy work for them or some training for them. There's a big gap between that, but that should not stop us from basically saying, this is the key metric I want to measure. And we believe, for some reason, we believe that what happens on the website actually drives the future laggard 9 months down the line revenue for us. If we believe that, then we'll start working on this, right?
Yeah, that's I love that. And I love also that you mentioned, behind all this is the zooming out, like zooming in when you need to, but when you're developing these KPIs and what's actually mattering to your making an impact on your business, it's that zooming out to realize what are those overall KPIs that you need to be thinking about. And those are the things that, those are the things, the numbers that I have to report to my boss. Like my boss doesn't care about all the details. Like I can look at the details, but that's my business. Like he wants to know top line things.
Like, Mike, you're doing this. Why are you doing this? What's it getting us? At the end of the day, what's the delta, right? What is the delta?
Right.
Does that pay for itself, right? Like, does that, and so on. So those are good questions for each one of us at every level, right? And last thing I wanted to mention, I am sort of going back and forth. It's a lot of topics. I have a lot of things in my head.
I love it.
So one thing I want to going back to data literacy and also thinking about data culture. A lot of companies, this sort of digital transformation started 5 years or so ago, where many organizations started down this path of, like, for example, for hospitals, EMR happened. Everything became electronic. Nothing is now on paper. Everything, all the processes had to be digitized. That means the claims processor, claims analyst now have to go through a different process. It's all digital. They're much faster turnaround. It is not like you fax something, months later something is getting faxed to you. It's all fast now. It's all digital. That means these folks who are being, many of them are very tenured, 20 years, 25 years, they have to find a new way of learning things. When we are thinking about data culture, I would invite you to think about data culture in a more holistic way. Data culture is just not equal to data literacy. Data culture has 4 Ds, and I think I may have talked about this again to your audience at some point. But think about there are 4 important Ds. Data culture sits on the premise, on the foundation that data culture sits on is data maturity. And data maturity is not a 0 and 1. That means, I have data maturity now. I have easy access to data. Most of the folks are in their journey towards integrating data sources, perhaps moving it to cloud as needed, perhaps creating those data dictionaries and metadata and data integrity and governance, so that there is one single source of truth that is existing, and it's an easy access, right? So data maturity, all the governance, security, all of those, ETL, process, cloud, access, all of that is data maturity. That is the foundation on which data culture sits on, which means if you have like data that nobody trusts, you cannot make that organization data driven. And I have had a client, it's a gaming company, and their big problem was the app was getting downloaded, activation happening, avatars, all of that is happening. But when you ask people, okay, great, and they were doing a bunch of A/B testing and so on, but you ask people, okay, what decisions are you making on this? They're like, yeah, we did this, but I don't quite trust this data. So why are you doing this? So nobody, like, from top to bottom, people are like, and they all, every time they would put a data, there'll be a but and 100 caveats to it, because the data. If you pulled activation, for example, the product activation, people downloaded and started using it, activation for their online game. That data activation from 3 different sources were 3 different values. So of course they were not trusting it. And if you don't trust data, you'll not make decisions based on it. So data maturity is sort of the foundation on which data culture sits. Once you have some reasonable level of data maturity, which means that you have some access available for not only just data scientists, but citizen analysts, the product marketing folks, the going back to maybe a Verizon, if it is customer care data, do they have access to the data for their own self? I am picking up the call, what is happening on my call, and so on. Am I also fully supported by the internal systems as I'm serving the customer, and so on? So all that is data maturity. Second part is data literacy. No, actually, second part, before even data literacy, it comes data-driven executives. Because without executive sponsorship, you can do all your effort towards data culture. And I've seen many companies, they're making an effort like, oh, we don't need to bother the executives. We're going to just do this ourselves at the trenches level. And we're going to do this like sort of grassroots and so on. You can do that all you like. You're not going to move the dial on being data-driven, because decisions are being made at the top, and they're being cascaded down. So if your data is not at the decision-making stage, you can do data all you like. It's not going to get decision-making. So data-driven leadership needs to, first of all, need to be somewhat data-driven. And if they're not, there are ways to move them towards, and that's why we have leadership workshops, holding their team accountable, giving them space to do sort of basic analysis, maybe zero-based budgeting, many ways of doing that. But basically,
so what advice do you have for those? Because what you just said is right. But what about, what advice do you have for those employee groups that are right now trying to develop a data culture, and they're working really hard, but to your point, maybe they don't have executive sponsorship. Maybe right now it's at the employee level, and they want to serve it up. Do you have any advice for those folks?
Groups like that within organizations, there's a Tableau community, and there's a Power BI community, and there's a lot of grassroots efforts happening. I love community, don't get me wrong. I think community is what binds it all together. However, if you don't have your executive sponsorship, you're going to sort of remain small in that group. The opted in people will be like, okay, participating. They'll come for your Thursday night happy hour. They'll be there for your brown bag, but it'll be a limited impact. Maybe the BI and developers are interested, and they'll be there, and maybe some data scientists. But the impact is not there unless the enterprise is able to use what you're producing, right? Because you're not producing data for the sake of it. You're producing that when somebody is making a decision of who to target, where do I spend my 100K, or whether I should spend some time in optimizing my conversion online or whatever else. At that point, they are using data, and that's where like when the executives are aligned and they are on board, and typically when we see success, in fact. Nowadays, we've done those projects as well where it was grassroots, don't talk to our executives, just sort of do the grassroots stuff. We've done that and we have failed. That doesn't go a whole lot place. Maybe we work with them in 2 quarters and nothing happens. At the end of the day, nowadays, we don't even sort of start on the projects unless there is an executive sponsorship. And the way we ensure that is the first thing we do is voice of executive. We work with executives to understand their vision of data culture and data literacy. Because and once we have heard them, they are able to hear us. Yes. Right? Like, because executives they're so fragmented, they're going from meeting to meeting. Every 20 minutes, their context is changing. They will forget all about you and all about your pitches or whatever else, and data literacy, we need to do this. Unless it's in the context of their work day to day, and they care about top KPIs. Their CEO is responsible to the board. And he's on the hook for certain metrics. So unless there are things which are tying to those metrics, he's not going to be interested. And you need to figure out a ways and cases to where you can say, we need to do this because this will tie and this will move our top KPIs. And not only that, we will have a sustained mechanism of moving, not only optimizing decision at your level, executive management, upper management, but every level, because every individual will be then now looking at their own data, their own sort of flow. They know what they're working on, their KPIs are lining up to the top KPIs, right? And that's where data literacy, the third D of the data culture, comes in picture. So that's why, once the leadership is in the place, you need the data literacy at the right level, again, persona and use case driven. And the fourth part is decision-making process. So decision-making process is, do they have one? If there is one, there's a forward-looking, backward-looking planning process, and is data part of it? And if not, how do you make it? So all of that together, when you're looking at making your organization data-driven, think of it holistically. It's not, I will send some people to training and
Mm-hmm.
I mean, now talk about these different
Yeah.
aspects. There's a lot of devils in the detail here. There's a lot of thinking and strategizing and placing things before another. How do you make, once people sign up, how do you make sure even simple thing like they will complete? How do you make sure learning transfer rate happens? How do you make sure their application happens? How do you make sure that the executives are being held accountable to what they need to be signing up? All of those things need to happen.
Well, I love your frameworks, your just all the things you've done to help organizations and people avoid those mistakes that are so easy to make, and all your questions, all your processes. For those who want to learn more about you, definitely check out the book Behind Every Good Decision, and also go to Aryng. The website is ARYNG. And Piyanka, do you want people to connect with you on LinkedIn as well?
Yeah, sure. People can definitely follow me. And then, I would love to connect to folks where we can add value for sure.
Okay, wonderful. For those listening to the podcast, to connect with Piyanka on LinkedIn, the short URL would just be ex.pn/Piyanka, spelled Piyanka. Piyanka, you're always on fire. And today you did a fantastic job sharing your passion. And thank you so much for sharing your insights with our community, because we want to make less mistakes. We want to be smart.
Yeah.
With the things that we're doing around data literacy and building a smart data culture. And all your advice is just so good, and great questions to be asking that require a lot of thought and time. And so thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Thank you for having me here. It's always so fun to talk to you, Michael.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Data Talk. We share out new episodes every single week, and you can find the full catalog of previous episodes as well as YouTube videos by going to the Experian news blog. The URL is just experian.com/datatalk. And as always, we love hearing from our community. So if you have any comments or suggestions for future shows, please reach out. You can find us on Twitter at Experian Data Lab, or you can always reach out to me directly. My email is michael.delgado@experian.com. Take care, and we'll chat next week.